I read a quote years ago. I don't remember the author. I think it may have been Hunter Thomas, but it went something like this. An artist is a person that can hold two opposing values at the same time, yet still function. I was raised with two opposing values. I was raised with the values of the grit, as some people said, the greatest generation, my granddad's generation. They lived through World War II, they lived through the Depression, and they were, I guess, what I will call post-war values, in that these people had lived through extreme hard times and uncertainty, starting with the Great Depression, and then going right off the heels of that into the Second World War with rationing and all the uncertainty that came with that. And the mindset that came out of that on the other end was very, very different than the mindset we have today in regard to possessions and things. My granddad, growing up, having went through those difficult times, never took anything for granted and saved things for a rainy day. I grew up around that environment. When Granddad would, he worked in a mechanic shop. When he couldn't stand not to save even ball bearings or nails or nuts and screws. We've talked about all of the, the thrifty things that he used to do, and he'd bring those things home. And when a shed would fill up, he would build another shed and start filling that up, because you never know. I mean, he remembered back to the days of how poor they were. He told me that he remembered a neighbor, and the kids went to a one-room school, that the only thing that they had to eat was a little sparrow sandwiches, and the kids would have to go out with slingshots and shoot the sparrows in the barn, and that's what they brought for lunch. And that made a strong impression upon him. He told me that when they left Oklahoma to head west, after they couldn't no longer scratch a living off the homestead, that they passed a guy that had an old Model A with the engine out of it, and he'd kicked the front windshield out, and he had 4 horses, and the rains were coming through the windshield. That's what he had, and that's what he had loaded up all of his possessions and his goods to come west for a better life. So grew up around that, grew up seeing that, and grew up, how can you not grow up making that a little bit of your own? Fast forward, me being raised in the 80s, the MTV generation, and the height of consumerism, I was raised with another set of values that are very much incompatible with those of my grandfather. And those values are, well, to boil it down, what makes you happy is possessions and the buying or the acquiring of things. A lot of people do it. I've done it. Maybe you've done it. You feeling sad, you're feeling a little depressed or something, it gives you a little bit of a boost, a little bit of joy to go to the store and to buy something that you want, maybe you didn't need, or maybe to order something on Amazon. I've heard some people have the same self-medicating, I guess, that they'll use with food. I personally haven't struggled with that. But the consumerism, I don't know how you could not, being constantly bombarded with those messages, how you could not adapt that and buy into it and make that a little bit of your own. Been thinking about this stuff. I woke up this morning about 3 o'clock, and I've thought about this for a couple hours. And what started it was yesterday, Brian, my neighbor, he works for me a couple days a week, and we were going through the big shop and I'm trying to get rid of things. I'm trying to make my life as small and as simple as possible. And I found that I was really struggling with letting go of some things. And the things that I'm talking about have been acquired in 2 different ways. One, they were family heirlooms or gifts from friends and family that come with obligation. And then the latter, of course, are things that I have acquired myself. Growing up with such my grandfather being such an influence of that Depression era mentality, every garage sale, anyone who was ever giving anything away, if I saw something that was quality, and whether it was a jack or tools, even though I had more than I needed, I couldn't resist the temptation because, you know, I might need that someday. I might need that someday. And so after 20, 30 years of this, it starts to get a little bit out of hand. You also think about when you have something in your hand that you haven't used for 10 years, but you realize what it's worth, or you realize maybe you paid a lot for it. It's hard to get rid of it. It's hard to let that go, because I don't know if it's the financial side of it, or if it's the emotion that gave you something that you needed when you were sad or depressed, and it's a difficult thing to get rid of these things. The other side is even worse. These are the things that we've acquired through family and friends. And I'm not going to single anyone out, but or I'm not picking on my family or anything, because it's rightfully so to pass on family heirlooms and to keep those memories alive. I agree with that. But where do you draw the line with that? A perfect example is my father-in-law, Vince, has got an antique store in the Midwest. And I was there some years ago, and he's got an area that has World War I and World War II items, a lot of uniforms and things. And he receives these things from family members that their loved ones have passed on, and they have these, maybe have these uniforms or this paraphernalia or memorabilia, whatever you want to call it. And they're not sure what to do with it. And I saw uniform after uniform after uniform that people had either sold or donated to the antique store. And I thought, well, how sad is that? My initial reaction was, how sad is that those folks don't respect their grandparents or grandfather or his service enough to hold on to those things and to cherish and to value them. That was what went in my mind. I remember it distinctly. And here I am now, being faced with the same thing. I have uniforms, and I have all of those things, canteens and helmets and all the things that my grandfather had during World War II. And the uniforms they're wool, and they require, you have to look after them, and it's something you have to kind of make an effort to look after, and it's one more thing. And if it were just a uniform, or if it was just a set of plates or china from family, that would be one thing, and that would be perfectly appropriate to keep it. But it can get to the point where the obligation that comes with these things starts to become a problem. When we find, and I've been here before, that you no longer have room in your shop or your house or your garage for your possessions, and you have to go out and you have to rent a storage locker to hold these things, you know, maybe that's something we need to take a look at. Maybe something is wrong. I'm not talking about intermediary stuff where I might be moving and I have to put stuff temporary. I'm talking about a lifestyle of not having room in your own home and property for your possessions, where you have to go and hire a storage place. So I'm faced with these things. So I have granddad's uniforms, for example, and it's not just this one thing. It's a mountain of things. What is my obligation with those things? What is my obligation? How long is a person to keep those things? You might say, well, that's going to be important to Jack someday. It may or it may not. How do I know? Where does my obligation stop? And is it wrong for me to let these things go because I can't keep everything, and those values that the greatest generation had, or my grandfather had, are not compatible with the values that I have? So here we have a perfect storm. We have sharing the values of our grandfather, which is saving everything, indoctrinated and completely bought into the consumerism side of it, where the acquisition of possessions is going to make me happy. We have the perfect storm. So we're not throwing anything away. We're saving. Our grandfather is talking to us, saving things, but then we're consuming, and we're getting to the point where now we don't have room for anything, and we're renting storage areas. It's a tough thing. What about gifts that people give you? We actually, and I think folks can relate, we have things in our home that have been given to us, and unfortunately when you receive a gift, it does come with an obligation with some folks that we keep and we put out It's sad. We put out if we know they're coming over, so they see that we treasure these things as much as they did. So we need to, do we want to do that? Is it fair to do that? I guess what I'm learning from that is when I give someone something now, I tell them right up front, I want you to know that this comes with no obligation. If you were to sell this on eBay, if you were to give it away, if you were to throw it away, I won't think less of you, and you never have to hide it. You'll never have to bring something out that you don't like, hoping that I will see it if I come over to visit. So we can start with that. So where do we go from here? What do we do with Granddad's uniform? My folks gave us some things. You know, one thing that was really important to my mom and really special to her is our first walking shoes, our baby shoes, were she had them bronzed, and that was something. You know, that's just a different. It's just a different generation. That was something that my grandparents did. My mom was raised with it. She thought that was important. So I have these things now. But it's not really that important to me. Is it important to Jack to have my baby shoes when he has his own family? Or am I passing on this burden of obligation that has been put upon me, that would put upon my parents and put upon their parents, onto my own kids? Or do I cut that off now and be realistic and reasonable? Let's save some things. Maybe we save Granddad's medals, and we make a nice box, and we have the stories, and we write them down, and we save that, and not necessarily all of the gear and the paraphernalia. So I guess, you know, what I'm finding is, you know, I'm finding that this mountain of stuff and all of these possessions is making my life miserable, and it's getting to the point where it's making me depressed. I literally, yesterday when I was going through things, and I was looking at one particular thing were drill bits and Allen wrenches. I had mountains of them. And the idea was, well, these drill bits, of course, you know, they're not sharp anymore. And someday I'm going to sharpen those drill bits. You know what? I'm never going to sharpen those drill bits. It's time to let those drill bits go. And if you have 10 or 15 or 20 of the same one and they're all dull, and you look at them and you know you're never going to get to them, let them go. It's time to let them go. Maybe go buy yourself a brand new set of drill bits, and when they get dull, learn to sharpen them. If you don't have the ability to sharpen them, throw them away and go buy a replacement, and keep it simple. I will be the first one to admit I have totally bought into consumerism. I enjoy, just like you guys, nothing better than buying a new gun or a new knife or a new this or a new tool or a new that. But the reality of it is, that's starting to come to me, is that none of that stuff do I need. Will it make my life better? Will it give me happiness, and will it give me joy? Maybe for a little while. But what I found yesterday was when Brian was working with me, and Brian doesn't have a lot of stuff, doesn't have tools. I probably sent him home with 500 pounds of tools and jacks and all these things that I have acquired over the time with that World War II Depression era mindset. It was time to let them go. And I'll tell you what, I got more joy from giving those things to him than to me hoarding them and keeping them in the shop. Another thing, I guess there is a third way. I want to speak I'll wrap up here, but I want to speak a little bit about the obligation also that comes with gifts. When you have a YouTube channel that gets the size of mine, you have folks that come out of the woodwork that want to send you things unsolicited, and it's hard to turn down. If there's something, you know, when Benchmade calls you, for example, and they say we want to send you some knives, it's hard to turn that down. And I have a lot of small companies and different things that will reach out to me and say, hey, we've got this product we think that could be good for you, and we want to send it to you. No obligation. Well, as soon as someone says no obligation, you know that there is an obligation, and rightfully so. And I've been too soft with this, and I've been too lax with this, and I've been maybe too greedy, receiving with the desire to have, because I love tools. And if someone wants to send me tools, I'd love to have tools. But the obligation that comes with those things is not worth it. And this has happened to me several times. I've had folks that have said, hey, we want to send something. And I try to tell them, I'm like, if I can work a video in, I'm happy to do it. And I never, ever, hardly ever charge for these things. If you have a good product and you're a small business, I'm happy to help. It gives me content. Guys like to watch it. And it's not a big deal. But every once in a while, someone says something that's actually really bad. And it's something that I would never recommend. And I try to be very careful and upfront with folks and tell them, look, if I make no promises. If we can work it in, or if it's something that I like, there's a good chance you might see it in a video. And some folks get really upset. And I had a guy, I'm not going to name any names, but is hounding me on the phone and sending me emails and sending me invoices for a product that he sent me that, quite, to be honest with you, it's not a good product and not something I would endorse or use. And I've told him, if you want your product back, you're welcome to. It's not important. Anyway, we're working that out. But the point is that these things come with obligation, and I'm going to be really, really careful and try to politely step away from that and to not get so drawn into this desire to have things, and even if they're free, the cost is just too high. The cost is too high. So I'll close with this. Some people have made some comments and that really struck home with me, I wouldn't say attacking me, criticizing me, and I think rightfully so. You talk about values and you talk about common man stuff and this and that, but you're one of the biggest consumers in the whole world. Everything you show is new this and new that, and I have thought a lot about that the last couple days, and I have to say that it's true. I completely lost my train of thought right there. I always admire guys that can turn the camera on and express a point or an opinion in one take, and not a bunch of jump cuts. Anyone can make a video with jump cuts when it comes to mine. I'll close with this. I think that having these opposing values has brought me to the point where I'm at now, where I've gotten off track with it. I have gotten too wrapped up into the possession of things, too wrapped up into consumerism. And me admitting this on the video, admitting public, is going to bring a lot of I told you so's on there, and that's fine. If we deserve it, we deserve it. But what I want to do with the channel, and what I want to do is I want to get back to the simpler way of life. I want to embrace more the value of my grandfather's values than the values that I acquired and learned through my MTV generation. Does that make sense to you? And so for me, that journey starts into rejecting that desire and that passion to have more and more and more, and getting rid of those things that I acquired with these two opposing values. And I am getting medieval on it. You should see the stuff that went off. And I know folks, every time I do these videos, folks say, well, give me your stuff, give me your stuff. I'm not giving you my stuff because logistically it's not possible. I'm not shipping tools and iron and heavy stuff all across the country in boxes. I don't have to be honest with you, I don't want to do it. I don't need to do it, and I don't want to do it. I have plenty of mouths to feed here. Brian's taking things. I have other friends. We have folks at church taking things. The things will go to a good home. So I wish I could give everyone something, but it's just not realistic. But that's the way I want to take. That's the way I want to take my life, and the way I want to take the channel. When I walk into my shop, I want things neat. I want them organized, and I want to know what I have. Gone are the days of having big boxes full of drill bits and big boxes full of sockets. I have packed around I'll bet it was 100-pound box of broken sockets and tools and extras. I gave the whole thing to Brian, and he was thrilled. He didn't have any SAE sockets. It felt good to do that. So I guess I'm just saying this publicly to have some accountability, and I want to bring you guys along, and I want you to join me with this. It's interesting. I really feel, not to sound crazy or anything, but I really feel that this is a strong and powerful message from God for me to get centered again and to get back to the reason why we came out here, and not to get so wrapped up into all these things. We need things, we need tools, but let's think twice and sleep on it before we purchase stuff, and let's buy quality so that we don't have to continue to buy and buy and buy again. So I will be bringing you along in the next few videos. We're going to be going through categories like we have been in the shop, and hopefully it will inspire you to do the same, because where we're at now, where everything is coming to head with these incompatible two things that I'm holding in my head, are not making me happy. And I'm not as happy now as I was when I had nothing. So it's time to get back to that. So don't be too hard on anyone who has I guess I admire a guy more who goes the wrong direction, realizes it, makes a course correction, and gets himself correct. To me, I admire and I have more respect for the man who went off the rails, got himself back together, pulled himself up and back in the right direction, than I do for the man who never got off the rails at all. And I'll close with this. And then how many times am I going to close this video? There's a story that Christ teaches in the Bible about the prodigal son. We have two boys. We all know the story, or if you don't, you should know it. We have one that is basically has stayed with his father. And the younger one, who was a wild hare, said, "Dad, I want my inheritance. I want all the money that's due me, my inheritance, and I'm going to go do my own thing." He takes off. Of course, we know the story. He wastes all of his money in riotous living, as the old King James puts it, comes crawling back. He's expecting his father to make him a second-class citizen. He doesn't even think that when he comes back home, he's going to be able to stay in his dad's house. He's thinking, if I could just stay with my dad's servants, with his slaves, to be the least, as long as I'm back home, that's all I care about. I don't need to be reinstalled in the position that I was. But that's not what his father did. He brings him in, he puts the signet ring on his finger, which was basically like giving him the credit card with no balance. He could have went into town, bought anything he wanted. Throws a party, kills the fatted ox, and completely reinstalls him to his past position. Well, what does that have to do with what this video we're talking about today? Well, what it means is that God admires and loves and respects the man who comes correct. You can even make the argument more, or has a greater appreciation for the one that never left. So don't be too hard on guys on the internet or me or whoever that maybe come to a different conclusion on something, or want to go in a different direction, or have done things in the past that you don't like. The fact that they admitted it and they realized they were going down the wrong path and made that correction is worthy of respect.